So, welcome back. Everybody get a drink? Everybody went to the bathroom? Everybody good to go? Because we are going straight to the home stretch now with three talks in a row. Our next speaker is a developer and consultant at ThoughtWorks, and as she says, her specialty is being a generalist. And she will give us some extra perspective on a topic we've already heard this morning. So, we are going to talk about surveillance capitalism. Give me a big hand for Fiona Coe.
Hello. As was stated, hi. So my name's Fiona, and I'm a software developer and a consultant with ThoughtWorks. But today, the reason I'm here is to talk to you all about the people fighting for all of our privacy and our autonomy in a world where people are trying to invade it for power and for profit. But why am I here talking to you all about this? Well, in the earlier part of my career, I worked in audience segmentation for ad targeting. What we did was we looked at the clickstream data of all the interactions that users had with our website, and we tried to make some assumptions about why they were visiting and read into that a little bit. That way, we could target ads at them that little bit better and therefore make more money. Now, at the time, I had no real thought that there was any issue with that. But since then, the amount of data that's being collected about all of us, and the types of assumptions being made, and the types of things that we are being targeted with, have really changed and expanded. Now, data sources from our web traffic from all over the net are put together, and this is also used for political marketing. What's possible with exactly the same technological approach when used to shift people's thoughts and eventually their actions to meet the wishes of a few people with power is really astonishing. I'll show you a couple of examples of this. So this is an ad that was shown on Facebook during the lead up to the UK EU membership referendum. This ad seems to imply that Turkey will join the EU, and that this would somehow mean that the entire population of Turkey would decide to move on over to the UK. This question it asks here isn't really a question, it's more of a statement, because this was only shown to people for whom the answer to that question was already clear. The only reason we are seeing this ad now is because the UK Parliament forced Facebook to hand it over, along with many other ads like it. Now, as we all know, Turkey didn't join the EU. This wasn't really on the table at the time either. But there was no opportunity to have that public discourse. There was no one there to correct that messaging, because this was only being shown to people who wouldn't question it. This means we end up even more in our own bubbles, without having public discourse about these topics. Another example, this time from the lead up to the US presidential election in 2016. Now, this ad was placed by Cambridge Analytica on behalf of the Trump campaign. We'll talk a bit more about them later, but this is part of their smear campaign against Hillary Clinton. The only reason, again, that we see this ad now is because of whistleblowers who leaked documents that contained this ad. These can also be even more powerful when they are not shown to us as ads per se. They don't appear in the parts of the site we are used to seeing ads. Instead, they're right there in our newsfeed looking like content, just with a small sponsored tag. Or worse still, when they are what's known as dark posts or unpublished posts. Now, these are not even shared with the people who are following the poster. They're also not shown on the poster's timeline. They are only shown to those people specifically targeted. This is even a very simple example of misinformation. It doesn't even take advantage of what's now possible with deepfakes tech. In her book, which coined the term, Shoshana Zuboff describes surveillance capitalism as a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. This is one of 8 definitions, the first of 8 that she gives, but her second definition describes behavior modification. I think that's also important to point out. Another way we could see this same thing is as kind of a cycle, where we start with tracking, where we have all of these data brokers collecting information about us from all over the web, using this to create a profile. Who are we? What are our values? What messaging are we susceptible to? And then using this for many things, including targeting content at us. And whether this targeted content even really works or not is just one more thing to track and to learn from in this kind of vicious cycle. This is made yet worse by its intransparency, with most users being unaware and not having at all given informed consent. I don't consider scrolling through those terms and conditions that no one reads, that are a mile long, as informed consent. It's difficult for us to even move away from these platforms when we know that they're damaging, because they're so tied to our social connection to each other and to our opportunities. It's like, have you ever tried to get your friends or family to move away from WhatsApp? It's kind of difficult. But user participation in any part of this cycle benefits the platforms that implement them, because it's yet another opportunity to show another ad, yet another opportunity to show more targeted content, which is more profitable, and that's how they make money. Today I'm going to talk a lot about Facebook, but they are by no means the only example of this. In fact, Meta's entire offering are a great example of this, and some of what Google offers as well. But those are just 2 examples. Now, I could spend the rest of the time just talking about the problem space here, but I really don't want to do that. Partly because it's not very joyful, but also because it's kind of been done. So instead, what I would like to do is introduce you to some of the movements and some of the people who are fighting against this. I've been really lucky over the last 10 years or so to have met many of these people myself. And I think it gives hope, and it can motivate us to act when we're aware of the successes that are already in progress. So, then let's start the introductions. The first group of people I would like to introduce you to are crypto party hosts. Now, when I say crypto party, I'm not talking about crypto bros. I'm more talking about cypherpunks. Has anyone here been to a crypto party? If you would like to tell me that you have, please feel free. Okay, a couple of people. So, for anyone not yet aware, crypto parties are events where volunteers give free workshops to anyone who's interested in learning about using privacy-preserving tools online. This is a great way to tackle that first part of the cycle that I talked about earlier, tracking. At least in Australia, when I first came to know about this term, the person popularizing it was Asha Wolf. And she was popularizing this term at a particularly important point in Australia's digital rights history, because it was just after some legislation came into act. This legislation forced all internet service providers to store metadata about any user's internet or phone communications and keep that metadata for 2 years to make it available to government agencies. Due to this, it was very easy for her to popularize crypto parties in Australia. The way she defines it is a bunch of friends with computers and a slab of beer plus the desire to learn to use the most basic crypto programs. Now, I'll just quickly define the term in there. It's a very Australian term, slab of beer. It refers to a slab is this cardboard box that this gentleman is showcasing. It would contain 24 beers. So with the technical terms out of the way, we can get to the core message. Really, I think what she's talking about here is us sharing our digital literacy, the privilege we have of this technical know-how, with other people who maybe want or need that protection. And I think this is a beautiful idea. I'm not the only one who thought it was a beautiful idea. It has since then become a global movement. And now we have had crypto parties in more, or at least 59 countries across the world, as well as remote. It's unsurprising that the popularity of these crypto parties exploded at about that time, because it was just the next year that the Snowden revelations were revealed. Here are some examples of the kind of software that people could learn to use at crypto parties. This is by no means expansive, like there's so much more that gets taught there. And at the very top, we can see the website. If you go to the crypto party website, which is maintained by anonymous volunteers from across the world, you will find lots of resources to teach yourself or to use to teach others about using any of these tools. They also have a full guide about how to plan, how to market, and how to run your own crypto party. If that feels like a bit too much work, they also have a list of places where crypto parties are taking place. So maybe you'll find one near you to volunteer at or just attend. When I was volunteering at some crypto parties, a lot of the people who I was meeting were journalists. They are a great example of a group who really can benefit from this kind of know-how, not just to protect themselves, but also to protect their sources. When Edward Snowden first got in contact with journalist Glenn Greenwald, he first had to encourage Glenn to familiarize himself a little bit better with some privacy-preserving communication tools before he could reveal what he knew. Glenn talks about this in depth in his book, No Place to Hide. Speaking of whistleblowers, that's the next group of people who I'd like to talk about. And specifically, I would like to talk about some of the things they brought to all of our attention about the inner workings of the surveillance capitalism machine. The first example is Cambridge Analytica. Fortunately, I don't have to explain to you who they are because there was this excellent talk earlier about social cooling. So thanks for that, Timon. So we already know Cambridge Analytica as a firm who was specializing in data mining and in audience segmentation based on personality traits. But what I want to talk about is their demise. What was their undoing was that all of this data they were using to make these personality trait-based segmentation was Facebook data that they had wrongly acquired. They acquired this data from users who had not given consent and against Facebook's terms. The way we came to know about that is because it was published in The Guardian and The Observer, thanks to whistleblowers who came forward to provide us with that information. One such whistleblower is Brittany Kaiser, who released documents including this marketing slide where Cambridge Analytica boast about the impact that they had on elections globally. We also saw another excerpt from her documents at the very beginning, the smear campaign against Hillary Clinton. Another example of one of these whistleblowers is Christopher Wiley. He describes here a little bit about how this personality trait-based segmentation is used. He describes that whatever it is we think the target profile will be receptive to, we will create content on the internet for them to find. And then they see that, and they click it, and then they go down the rabbit hole until they start to think something differently. Christopher described Cambridge Analytica's product as a psychological warfare tool. And what he did was he released the names of some of the people who were funding and using that tool. In the end, these were the outcomes of these whistleblowers' work. And though these two figures look rather impressive, they did not sustain. And even though Cambridge Analytica was forced to close, many of the people previously working there did move on to work at very similar firms, because there are similar firms. But there were also really good outcomes that are lasting. For instance, we are all now here having this conversation because we now have this information. It was brought into the public eye. There was also significant damage done to Facebook's name. Other than that, there was impact on regulation. I'd like to talk about two more whistleblowers, this time from Facebook. Firstly, we have Sophie Jung. She says that in her time at Facebook, I found multiple blatant attempts by foreign national governments to abuse our platform on vast scales to mislead their own citizenry. Sophie was working as a data scientist in the fake engagements team at Facebook. There, she uncovered huge numbers of inauthentic accounts, which were being used to create likes and positive interactions with the posts of a certain groups of political parties, as well as huge numbers of inauthentic accounts being used to post abusive comments at the opposition party or at the media. But what really disappointed her was how this was being handled by Facebook, how these different cases of policy violations were being prioritized against one another. It seemed to her that the places where this was going on that would get priority are the ones most likely to impact Facebook's image. And this led to countries in the world that are less well represented in the Western media, also less well moderated on Facebook. Another whistleblower from Facebook is Frances Haugen. Now, she worked at many other social media companies before eventually working at Facebook on civil integrity. And she describes that Facebook's algorithm gives the most reach to the most extreme and divisive ideas, and that this process is destabilizing some of the most fragile places in the world, like Ethiopia or what happened in Myanmar. She came forward with actual studies done in Facebook where they had discovered they had impacts like worse mental health for young users, also increase in the spread of misinformation, and encouraging of violence, leading sometimes to injury or death. But what these two Facebook whistleblowers have in common in their messaging is that they both saw Facebook as a place where a lot of very well-meaning people worked there, but that some decisions that were being made about priorities ended up leading to very different treatment for regions that Facebook didn't value. All four of these whistleblowers have testified in front of the UK Parliament, and some have also done so for the US Congress and for the European Parliament. Though all of these hearings happened in the global north, the effects can be felt globally. When it was revealed that Cambridge Analytica were working on elections in both Nigeria and Kenya, both countries then put in place new data regulations, both of which read very similarly to the GDPR. I'm really hopeful that we will see new regulations specifically targeting the kinds of things raised by these whistleblowers. But if we don't, then we can look to this next group of people who I want to introduce. They are net neutrality campaigners. Now, this is a very broad term, but specifically, I would like to talk about some of the folks who campaigned against Facebook's Free Basics project. For anyone not familiar, Facebook's Free Basics is this app. It's a partnership that Facebook have between mobile service providers in parts of the world with lower internet penetration and Facebook. What it involves is the mobile service provider gives some free data to its existing customers, and this free data can be used only through this app, where users have access to Facebook and other Facebook-approved apps. Now, this is meant to generate more customers for that mobile service provider, but definitely also provides a lot of additional data to Facebook, as well as more daily active users, which is a huge key measurement for them. What this means for the user, though, is that their entire experience is both curated by and visible to Facebook. And if they see something in that small bubble of the internet that they have access to, and they want to cross-check that, or they're being linked outside of that, they can't. Then they have to pay. It's a clear violation of net neutrality, but it's also a beautiful recipe for misinformation. Frances Haugen, who we met earlier, mentioned in an interview that there are sometimes jokes within Facebook saying that you could probably guess the next region which is going to be experiencing instability by just looking at where Facebook had entered a new market a couple of years earlier. I wanted to show you a map of all of the places where Free Basics was currently active. But this information was extremely difficult to come by. I looked all over Meta's website, and I couldn't for the life of me find a list of the 30+ countries currently having Facebook's Free Basics. So instead, I used a proxy service, and I can tell you that at least these 12 countries currently, as of May this year, have Free Basics actively available to them. But not every place that Facebook tried this did it work. The example I'd like to show of where it didn't is in India. So when Facebook tried to start Free Basics in India, they showed users this message here on the left. At the top of their newsfeed, they were shown this survey where they had the option to pledge their support for Free Basics, either now or later. One colleague of mine admitted that he was fooled by this deceptive design. And later on, when he learnt what this project really was, he tried to revoke his support, and he couldn't find a way to do so. But this just fueled him in joining the free software movement of India's counter movement, where they instead educated people about net neutrality, about what was being offered, and more crucially, what wasn't being offered as part of Free Basics. And they provided people with a way to make a choice. It was India's really strong tech community that was able to decipher what was being offered, to bring this conversation about net neutrality to people's dinner tables, then to make this a topic that people were really discussing. They did this with outreach, going to the streets. They did this also in the newspaper. They did it online, and they really got the message out there. In the end, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India did pass a regulation which blocked Free Basics and all other similar violations of net neutrality. A similar law was also passed in Chile, but so many regions don't have such laws, and Free Basics continued to spread across the world. But what I find interesting is recently, Facebook has started offering something different. They are now trialing something called Discover. It's only available in a few regions, but the difference with Discover is that users have access to the entire internet. The only catch is they have a data cap, understandable, and they have to go through a proxy service, which Facebook controls. This proxy service is designed to remove all of the really data-intensive traffic, to help that data cap last a little bit longer. So it takes out videos and audio and these kinds of things. But it really requires the user to put quite a lot of faith in Facebook, more than they would have to give to their ISP or their VPN service, for instance, Definitely more faith than I would put in Facebook, but I have the privilege of being able to afford to pay for my own data. For some of the people who campaigned against free basics in India, just blocking this service through legislation was not enough. They were now so aware of how many people around them did not have access to the internet. So instead, they started to offer training and set up these communal Wi-Fi hotspots using some open source Debian-based FreedomBox software in order to help more people to get online. Now, regulation is definitely one part of this, but another part is enforcement of that regulation. And that's where this next group of people I want to introduce come in. I'm calling them data regulation enablers. These are the folks who look at what the laws are and what companies are actually doing and try and hold them accountable. This is Carol Cadwalder, and she's an investigative journalist who was looking into some of the manipulative ads run by the Pro-Leave campaign, for example, the one I showed earlier at the very beginning. She was trying to uncover potential overspending on that campaign, and she did uncover this, but it was extremely difficult to do due to the lack of transparency. She points out in her excellent TED Talk that only you see your newsfeed, and then it vanishes. So it's impossible to research. We have no idea who saw what ads, or what was used to target those people, or even who placed the ads, and therefore who paid for them. She was the one who tracked down Christopher Wiley, and who we met earlier, and she was one of the people who encouraged him to blow the whistle on Cambridge Analytica. Now, what she's highlighting here is an unmet need for transparency. Another group of people who saw this same need is the authors of the Who Targets Me browser plugin. What you can do with their plugin is, in the lead up to an election, it only works then unfortunately, you can see which political groups are targeting you and how much. And this is great for users who are very interested to know, actually, how am I being manipulated? But better still, this is Max Schrems, and when he saw that browser plugin, he saw an opportunity to enforce the prohibition of micro-targeting based on political opinions, which in particular is protected under Article 9 of the GDPR, and to make future elections in Europe more democratic and fair. What he did was he tracked down people who had used that browser plugin in Germany in the lead up to the latest elections, and he convinced those people to donate their data to him. And now he has the very fun job of searching through all of that data to try and find GDPR violations. And if/when he finds them, he will take legal action. If anyone's not familiar with Max, he's a data privacy activist and also a lawyer. And for the last 10 years, he's had the rather expensive hobby of trying to hold companies accountable when it comes to EU data regulations. He's had quite some success. Fortunately, he's also been able to found a data privacy not-for-profit called NOYOB, that stands for None of Your Business. And I love it too. And that's helping him in scaling and funding his work. In case it's been a little while since you read the GDPR, maybe your mind's a bit fuzzy on that, this is what NOYOB are trying to enforce. It is Article 9 saying that the processing of personal data revealing racial, ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, amongst other things, shall be prohibited. I'm curious to know, who here has exercised their rights under the GDPR? Oh, cool, like 10 people, awesome. Okay, slightly easier question. who has thought about maybe exercising their rights under the GDPR, but like, not sure where to start, seems like a lot of effort? Okay, more people. Great. Maybe particularly interesting to you. On NOIOB's website, they also have a series of step-by-step guides that explain how do you go about forcing a company or a government to tell you the information that they have about you. And how do you then tell them to correct that? Tell them to delete that? And also some more interesting things around data processing and automated decision making. I think it's amazing what rights we can exercise under the GDPR, but it's a bit useless unless we do that. So who was it who we met today? Well, at the beginning, we met some of the folks giving their time to teach journalists and others about using privacy-preserving open source software. Maybe we'll bump into them at a crypto party near us. Next, we heard about some whistleblowers and the crucial information that they brought to the public about the inner workings of the surveillance capitalism machine. Next, I introduced you to some of the campaigners who made net neutrality a dinner table topic in India and encouraged legislation that stopped companies from being able to form tiny sections of information that they were the only ones who could control, and then just calling that the internet. And lastly, we met some of the people who keep companies honest in regards to this regulation that we have. Because regulation without enforcement is not very useful. We also saw how users and technologists alike can join and help this movement. But that's enough about all of those people. I'm really interested to get to know all of you. So thank you so much for listening. This here on my website, you can see a full list of my sources. So if you're interested to read more about anything that I mentioned today, and probably a couple of other things, you can find them there. And in the words of the Crypto Party guiding principles, be excellent to each other and do things. Thank you.